Pay-to-play has no place in the federal contracting process, and requiring the disclosure of campaign contributions for government contracts does just that. Mr. Chairman, I would respectfully urge that the amendment be adopted, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman may not reserve.
Yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from North Carolina.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the Cole Amendment and
the gentleman is recognized for 5
move
minutes.
to strike the last words. The amendment before us is a legislative attempt to circumvent a draft executive order, which would provide for increased disclosure of the political contributions of government contractors. The draft executive order being developed by the Obama administration would require federal contractors to disclose more information about their political contributions than they currently provide, particularly those contributions given to third-party entities. Some have said they oppose this effort because additional information could be used nefariously to create some kind of enemies list. In other words, they argue that companies should not disclose more information because people in power could misuse that information to retaliate against them. I just think there are fundamental problems with this premise. Under this logic, all campaign disclosures would be bad, not just the new ones. Government contractors already disclose contributions and expenditures by their PACs and those who contribute to them. Contributions by the officers and directors of government contractors are also required to be disclosed. Should we eliminate those provisions too? Of course not. The information is required to be provided already in law, and the executive order that the amendment would circumvent simply enhances the quality of that information. More than 30 groups, including nonpartisan, nonprofit organizations like Democracy 21, the Project on Government Oversight, Public Citizen, many others have concluded that the draft executive order would enhance transparency and decrease corruption. And these aren't the only groups that support the executive order. 2 weeks ago, a coalition of institutional investors and investor coalitions collectively managing more than $130 billion in assets also wrote to express their support. In their letter, they explained that corporate political activity presents significant risks to shareholder value, and transparency allows investors to put together in a more complete picture of the various risks to our investments. So, Mr. Chairman, as the Los Angeles Times said in a recent editorial, disclosure is the solution, not the problem. I believe that is the case. I urge members to defeat this amendment, and I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose? The gentleman from Georgia? Right. The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I rise in support of the Cole Amendment. And the reason why I do is twofold. Number one, I do think that there's some questions about what are the motives. Why should you have to tell the federal government absolutely everything in our society today when you're just bidding on a contract? I see some good in it. And, the gentleman mentioned the L.A. Times article. I think it makes some good points. But I also see how there's a double-edged sword, that there's too much information that's out there. But the other thing is this is a major change and a possible encroachment on your constitutional right of First Amendment freedom of speech as to who you give to. And so if we are going to make this the law of the land, public policy, it really should go through the legislative process, hearings and testimony, and let everybody have something to say about it instead of just one more executive order from the administration. So I think we should adopt the Cole Amendment, and I would be glad to yield back my time unless Mr. Cole wants any of it. And with that, I yield back. Thank you.
The gentleman from Georgia yields back. For what purpose the gentleman from Washington rise?
I rise in opposition to the
gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I, too, am concerned about this amendment, especially when these campaign contributions are given secretly. You know, our system has been improved by having public disclosure of political contributions. I think the more the public knows about where the money's coming from, the better off the citizenry is. So I just support the ranking member, Mr. Price, who gave a very complete description of why we're against this amendment, and I urge its defeat. And yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Oklahoma. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair,
The yeas and nays?
the gentleman has asked for the yeas and the nays. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Oklahoma will be postponed. For the purposes of the gentleman from Texas rise.
Have an amendment at the desk,
The
Mr.
clerk will
Chairman.
report.
Amendment offered by Mr. Gomert of Texas. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available by this act may be used for the new construction, purchase, or lease of any building or space in the District of Columbia, except where a contract for the construction, purchase, or lease was entered into before the date of the enactment of this act.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under this amendment, no funds would be made available by this act for the new construction, purchase, or lease of any building or any space in the District of Columbia, except where a contract was entered into before the date of the enactment. Now, in the District of Columbia right now, the federal government had exactly 304 leases at the start of this year. These leases cover more than 23.6 million square feet. This bureaucracy has grown beyond the bounds of being reasonable. The federal government, in addition to the 23.6 million square feet that it leases, also owns 109 buildings in the District of Columbia, and that doesn't even include all of the Department of Defense buildings, because those are administered by other than the GSA. The 23.6 million square feet come at a cost of around $1 billion every year to the taxpayer. Here we are in financially troubling times, and we need to send a message back to America. We know you're tightening your belts. We know that states and municipalities are having to tighten their belts, and we get it here also. The Appropriations Committee and the chair is to be applauded. They have done a wonderful job on this bill. There is an amount zeroed out for new building space in a specific area of this bill. It takes that good step and goes one step further and says no funds made available in this act can be used in any way for construction, for lease, or building out any space in the District of Columbia. It also should be noted that every cubicle, every desk we add in the District of Columbia ends up requiring states and municipalities to add space there. They have to put somebody in that space, because every time we add a desk with a bureaucrat behind it in the District of Columbia, they have to justify their existence. They have to create requirements for people back in the states or in the municipalities to respond so that they can justify their existence in the District of Columbia. The federal funds that might be used for new construction or new leases to add to the 23.6 million square feet of space already under lease and the 109 buildings, not even including the Department of Defense buildings, that money could be better spent reducing the federal deficit, or protecting our homeland in other ways. Let's let America rebound. Let's let America build back before we build or lease one more square foot in Washington, D.C. With that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina rise?
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, this amendment would prohibit any funds in this bill to be used for new construction, purchase, or lease of a new building or space in Washington, D.C. in the fiscal year 2012, the life of this bill. If adopted, this amendment, as I read it, would or could do several things. First of all, it would not allow DHS to renew leases in the Washington, D.C. area, which means the leases would lapse, leaving DHS employees without offices to work in, and subjecting the federal government to lawsuits because the lessors would have no choice but to begin litigation for damages to include costs to evict and lose rent. The amendment might require DHS to break current construction contracts due to a lack of funds if a new purchase or lease is required. It would not permit the GSA to condemn facilities that the DHS occupies if that were necessary. Therefore, it forced DHS to maintain occupancy until follow-on leases might be executed in 2013 or further down the road, or alternative space could be identified and prepared for use. The amendment, as I read it, might not permit DHS even to reconfigure its current facility space to provide seats for the new staff being hired, particularly for some of these new functions that are going to require reconfiguring, such as cybersecurity and intelligence missions. And then we need to ask, Mr. Chairman, what happens if a DHS facility in D.C. has a fire or a flood and we can't use it? This amendment would prevent, as I read it, would prevent rebuilding if a new construction contract was required as part of that rebuilding, as of course it might well be. So the questions just go on and on. This is not a well-advised or wise amendment. It's far-reaching, it has negative implications, and I urge its rejection and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington, the ranking member?
I rise in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
If I could ask the gentleman from Texas, the sponsor of the amendment, a question. Mr. Gohmert, if I could ask you a question.
Sure.
Why just the District of Columbia? You know, there's federal buildings in Virginia and Maryland surrounding the whole area. Why just the District of Columbia?
Well, the intent is that since this is where so much construction and leasing has been done, that that's where it needs to stop, that the bureaucracy here in Washington has expanded to the point that this was a good place to draw the line. If the gentleman is wishing to extend that across the country, you know...
No, I'm not interested in that. I just want to make that clear. But I was just interested why just the District of Columbia when this whole area here has many different government buildings, both in Maryland and in Virginia, which are proximate to the District of Columbia.
Well, if the gentleman would like to add those to this amendment, I'd be glad to accept that.
Let me also ask the gentleman, on the point that Mr. Price made about leases, do you see that a situation would occur that if a lease is expired, once this amendment was enacted and was signed into law, I doubt that it will be, but that that a person couldn't redo a lease? I mean, and what would you do in that situation if you couldn't build office space or you couldn't lease office space?
Well, you'd
have to leave the District of Columbia. Is that
if the leases were appropriately drafted, then normally they would have an option for additional time. That under this amendment would mean that that was a contract entered into prior to the enactment of this bill. And so that wouldn't be a problem. If it is a major lease expiring, then heaven forbid, but they would actually have to come back to Congress, and it would be a form of sunset for them to justify why they need to have a new lease. I think it's a great way of having oversight over groups that don't have their own building. We've leased massive 23.6 million square feet of space. Let's sunset some of that, or otherwise justify why you need another lease.
Regaining my time, I feel that Mr. Price has the better argument here, and I urge defeat of this amendment.
Gentleman yields back. Question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. Be the chair, the noes have it. The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Chairman, I'd ask
Gentleman
for
from Texas.
Yeas and nays.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas will be postponed. For the purpose, the gentleman from California, Mr. Issa, rise.
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Issa of California. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available in this act may be used to promulgate regulations that will result in private sector job losses to United States companies.
What purpose, the gentleman from Alabama, rise?
Point of order on the gentleman's amendment.
Gentleman reserves a point of order. Gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes in support of his amendment.
I thank the gentleman. This is a critical amendment. If not now, then when? If not on this bill, then when are we going to get to looking at American job creators in a positive way? There's no question if this amendment is held to a point of order that it will be seen again and again by those of us who care about jobs in America. Website that my committee launched, AmericanJobCreators.com, has already seen countless examples, in the thousands now, of different ways in which regulatory excesses have in fact cost jobs. Moreover, what we're seeing is a pattern of no cost-benefit analysis being done in any way, shape, or form on new regulations. Promulgating regulations, if they don't cost jobs, if they're a net benefit to the economy, wouldn't be a problem, at least not overall. But in fact, we have had EPA administrator, the former Mineral Management Service, now Ocean Energy, the Assistant Secretary of Interior, and countless more before our committee, each of whom seems to be muddled about cost-benefit on the regulations they create. They often say, of course we do cost-benefit. Then if you say, well, what do the cost-benefits show on a particular regulation? They're never familiar with it. It is, in fact, very clear that we know that we are costing jobs. The estimate by the Small Business Administration, I repeat, the estimate by the U.S. Small Business Administration is that regulations cost $1.75 trillion, or about $8,000 per employee, perhaps as much as $10,000 per employee. Not every regulation that costs money needs to, in fact, not happen, but it certainly should be a decision of the Congress and not an unelected individual somewhere in a well-windowed office with beautiful carpeting deciding on their own to have guidance or rulemaking that cost American jobs. The Department of Homeland Security is, in fact, one of the most insular organizations. They have proven not to know or care what America needs, only that they must do what they choose to do. This is an agency that is so excessive that they even found that sending FOIA requests to political appointees who redacted or simply didn't send them out was okay. That's the kind of thing that we need to deal with here in appropriations, and if not in appropriations, in broader legislation. My amendment simply seeks to force back to Congress the responsibility for regulations that cost jobs. If a study is done and it doesn't cost jobs, it would go forward. The fact is that most of our laws require some cost-benefit analysis, but since they're able to do it without ever formalizing it or waive it because they say they don't believe it would happen, we don't have that kind of fact. An amendment like this simply says if you're going to cost American jobs, come back to Congress.
With that, I would urge the passage of this amendment. Strongly believe that with 9% unemployment and in California 11% and more in other areas, it's time for us to say, don't pass a new regulation that costs jobs unless you're willing to bring it back to Congress.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Does the gentleman yield back the balance of his time? Does the gentleman from California yield back the balance of his time?
Yeah, I know he is.
Does the gentleman from California yield back the balance of his time?
I'd like to know if they're going to insist on their point of order.
I mean, the gentleman must yield back the balance of his time.
I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman insists on his point of order?
We insist on that point of order.
Gentleman will state his point of order.
Mr. Chairman, I make a point of order against the amendment because it proposes to change the existing law and constitutes legislation and appropriation bill and therefore violates Clause 2 of Rule 21. The rule states, in pertinent part, an amendment to a general appropriation bill shall not be in order if changing the existing law. The amendment requires a new determination. I ask for a ruling from the chair.
Does any other member wish to be heard on the point of order? Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I believe that, in fact, you will rule, if allowed to, on this point of order. It is unfortunate that our rules allow appropriators to legislate when they want to, but don't allow us to bring sensible reform when we believe it is necessary. I am not legislating, I am limiting. But I recognize that the ruling is inevitably going to go against us. I will endeavor to bring this to the attention of the body at every opportunity, and will be drafting regulation or a bill that would change the whole regulatory format. I would hope those who say on a technical basis they cannot support us today, even though they know that regulations are costing American jobs every day, will support legislation that would change this across government. And with that, I ask unanimous consent.
Are there any other members wishing to be heard on order?
Withdraw at this time.
Gentleman withdraws his amendment. Without objection, the amendment is withdrawn. Okay. For what purpose, gentleman from Alabama rise?
Forward.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
At this time, I yield to the gentleman from Nebraska to talk about an important immigration enforcement program.
So we'll go to this mic.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and Mr. Chairman, I rise to ensure that appropriate funds are provided for the 287G program in this bill. The federal government must have well-equipped partners to address interior enforcement concerns. However, the bill does not state specifically all funds for the 287G program, which would allow for robust law enforcement capacity. I want to ensure the record reflects that the administration's request is $68,321,000 and that this bill supports the President's request. Citizens nationwide are rightfully demanding secure U.S. borders and enforcement of our immigration laws. The desire in many places across this country to strengthen interior enforcement.
To remind the gentleman from Alabama, he must remain on his feet. Gentleman will proceed.
The desire, Mr. Chairman, in many places across the country to strengthen interior enforcement points to an overwhelming perception that throughout the nation the federal government is not as effectively as possible addressing serious security concerns such as the pernicious criminal activity related to illegal immigration in the border region. We need to better empower states and local law enforcement, and the 287G is a very important program. In 1996, Congress enacted Section 287G as an amendment to the Immigration and Nationality Act to provide necessary immigration enforcement assistance to state and local law enforcement entities. It authorizes the Department of Homeland Security to enter into agreements with state and local law enforcement, equipping them through thorough training to perform important immigration enforcement functions. Local law enforcement agencies are often closest to the problem. To date, Immigration and Customs Enforcement has trained more than 1,240 state and local officers nationwide pursuant to Section 287G programs. Since 2006, the 287G program, according to ICE, has resulted in the identification of more than 200,000 potentially removable aliens, mostly at local jails. 69 separate local law enforcement agencies participate in the program in 24 states, including Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Florida, Georgia, Maryland, Minnesota, Missouri, Nevada, New Jersey, New Mexico, North Carolina, Ohio, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, and Virginia. And ICE, it appears, has worked very diligently since 2009 to fix concerns with the program by strengthening public safety and improving consistency. In my home state of Nebraska, there is interest at the local level. The city of Fremont, for instance, in particular, has voiced enthusiasm for this program and could directly be impacted by an increase of funds available to help secure their community. Ensuring full funding for the 287G programs preserves a high spirit of federalism and empowering states to work together with the federal government on a critical homeland security matter. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, America has been for a long, long time a just and generous nation in regards to immigration policy, opening her arms to persons, particularly those facing social, economic, or even political persecution, who wish to come here and make a new contribution in a new community to the well-being of their own lives. This should remain the hallmark and spirit of sound immigration policy. But uncontrolled borders are a serious threat to United States national security, and with lax interior enforcement authority, we risk our ability to remain a just and generous nation in regards to immigration policy. So Section 287G plays a critical role in this process and should be funded at the administration's request.
Will the gentleman yield?
I'll yield.
The gentleman from Nebraska raises some excellent points, and I strongly support robust enforcement of our nation's immigration laws. That includes partnerships with states and local law enforcement through the 287G program. As the gentleman from Nebraska noted, 287G is an important tool among many and gives ICE a force multiplier for immigration enforcement. I thank the gentleman from Nebraska for his attention to this important program, and I will continue to work with him as we move this bill forward. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Micah, the chairman of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, rise? Seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, at this point, I was planning to offer to the House and to the committee for its consideration as we consider one of the most important appropriations measures that the House will consider, and that's for our Homeland security. I was prepared to offer an amendment here at this juncture to limit some of the funds that are made available to the Transportation Security Administration. And my intent is, I think, well-founded in having had the opportunity to review TSA's operations. Actually, one of the individuals responsible for creating TSA back after the events of 9/11, when we had to put in place a transportation security measure and operation for the nation, which we didn't have prior to that. When we set up TSA, and particularly where we provided for a new way of aviation passenger screening, we actually created two models. One, a private sector model, which is a federal setting of guidelines and all of the rules for conducting screening, and then federal operation of the screening, but also a second model which was federal government setting the rules and the protocols for operation, but using private screeners. And we set up 5 models of different size category airports to test this and see how it would work, testing the all-federal model against the federal model with private operators. I can tell you that after testing this several years after operationals, testing not by me but by the General Accounting Office, they found that in fact that the private screeners perform statistically significantly better than the other screeners. TSA wasn't happy with these findings and had captured a great deal of the market and activity So they did everything they could to distort some of the findings and change the way the airports were tested. Even so, about 16 airports now operate with private screeners under federal supervision. Tomorrow our committee will reveal the most comprehensive report of looking at these operations, and we're comparing apples and apples to see which one runs better and more cost effectively for the taxpayer. And without a doubt, this report will show that substantial savings. In fact, within 5 years, if we converted 38 of the top airports to federal operations with, again, federal oversight with private screening, we could save $1 billion. And I was prepared to try to transfer earlier in the bill double the amount of money. There's $144 million in here for private screening operations under federal supervision that we currently have, and double that amount of money, which could have gotten us much more passenger screening and do it much more cost effectively for the taxpayers. And actually most of our positive initiatives have come from these private screening models. In any event, that was my intent. At this point in the bill, I can only take money from the overall screening activity or limit it. It's my understanding that that after I strike the last word, I'll have an opportunity to offer an amendment that will in fact limit the amount of money for the all-federal screening model, not taking it out of the TSA, but giving discretion to the administrator and hopefully applying it once again we restart the private screening under federal supervision. Actually, it continues as I speak. All 16 airports continue, but we restart opening it to other airports. I want to make certain that we have the funds available to accomplish that goal, and that's the purpose of my amendment. So I'm not taking away from the overall money to TSA. I'm limiting the amount of money that can be used. And now we have a federal screening force, I'm told, of some 41,000, give or take 500 screeners. This bill authorizes up to 46,000, I'm told. So we stay within the caps.
The gentleman from Florida has expired.
I have an amendment at the desk.
What purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise? No, what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Micah of Florida. At the end of the bill, insert the following section: of the amount made available for screening operations under the heading Transportation Security Administration, Aviation Security, not more than $2,760,503,458 may be used for screener personnel, compensation, and benefits.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Alabama rise?
Nothing. I'm okay.
For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina rise?
In addition to the amendment, and
well, the gentleman has not been recognized on his amendment yet. The gentleman is going to be recognized. I thought the gentleman might be reserved.
My understanding, Mr. Chairman, maybe the gentleman can clarify it. My understanding was that the 5-minute address we just heard was addressing the amendment.
No, the gentleman rose to strike the last word, and at the close of that, he then offered his amendment. So the gentleman has a right to be heard based on the fact that he is now just offering his amendment. He had not offered it before. Gentleman reserves a point of order. Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes in support of his amendment.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do want to apologize to the members of the committee because we want to make certain that if we offered the amendment that it was in the proper form. As originally drafted, it was on a previous page, and I understand from the parliamentarian that we could only do a limitation at this particular stage. So that's why I had the time to explain and striking the last word my position and some of the history of my involvement with this. It's not that I'm just Johnny-come-lately on the floor to do some mischief with TSA. It's that I helped actually create the agency. I want it to be effective. I want taxpayer money to be properly expended. But when I see the results, and I've seen the way the TSA operates, you know, we started with 16,500 screeners on 9/11, and what failed on 9/11 was not the private screeners, it was the federal government, because the federal government failed to put in place the rules, the protocols, the standards, the levels of operation. They were stalling for years, I found out, and never put them in place, and that's something we had to do. But what we did is, again, we set up two models, and airports have had the right to opt out from the very beginning and go to private screening under federal supervision. Now we've been there, we've seen how it works. We have entire states that have said that they want the opportunity to have the second model, which has proven to be most cost-effective, not just from dollars and cents, but also from efficiency and effectiveness in operation. This is all about the performance of TSA. And the models that have been independently tested will show you that private screeners under federal supervision, again, proper oversight, setting the rules, they perform better. So that's the purpose of this, is to set aside some of that money. TSA came in, and I think that the administrator, while well-intended, was kept in the dark and fed a lot of mushrooms on what happens with these programs. And in order to justify 3,700 positions, administrative positions, in Washington, D.C., just in Washington, D.C., 3,700 positions, making on average $105,000 a person. Imagine that, what we've created, and another 8,000 plus administrators out in the field. But to justify those positions, what they did was they fudged, and GAO has also confirmed this, the facts on the cost of the private operation, on, again, of under federal supervision of passenger screening. So all this does, it doesn't take any money out of TSA. It gives the administrator the discretion to have that money, and he can use it for screening. And we believe that with the pending applications, which this bill and your bill helps open up, we want to make certain that there are adequate funds available to do it in the most cost-effective manner, and that's what my amendment provides for. I understand, Mr. Speaker, that I'm not allowed to yield back any of my time. Or reserve? Can I reserve?
No, no, no. The gentleman has to yield back the balance of his time.
How much time may I ask?
The gentleman has a minute and a half left.
Minute and a half left. So, again, the whole point of this is doing the best possible job for security. And stop and think about this. This bill provides $3 billion plus just for screening. $3 billion. I think the total of this bill is what, $8 billion, staff? 40.6. I'm sorry? I got 4. The entire bill is 46. But just for TSA is how much? Net is about 7.8. Close to $8 billion for TSA's operation. And I wouldn't begrudge them a penny if it's, in fact, used properly for the security of our nation, to make certain that people are safe in the skies. But I'm saying that this amendment does make certain that for a very cost-effective means of providing passenger screening, we can do a better job, we'll have the money available, and we won't rely on just the all-federal model. So I urge your support of this amendment and your consideration.
Gentleman yield back the balance of his time.
Yield back the balance.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Does the gentleman from Washington, the ranking member of the full committee, insist on his point of order?
I withdraw my point of order.
Gentleman withdraws his point of order. What purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina, the ranking member of the subcommittee, rise?
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the
amendment. The
amendment.
gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have been listening carefully to the gentleman as he described his intentions in offering this amendment, and all I can do, I think all any of us can do, is react to the amendment before us, not to hypothetical future amendments or future administrative actions. And on the face of it, I oppose this amendment. The bill provides $3.03 billion for screeners. This amendment would cut funding by $270 million. If this amendment is accepted, TSA would need to lay off 5,000 screeners. That's 10% of the current screener workforce. It would also eliminate nearly all the new screeners hired over the past 12 months. These are screeners that are needed to support, to operate new security equipment. Mr. Chairman, there's no way around it. This would decrease security. It would lead to longer wait lines just at a time that passenger growth is rebounding in our country's airports. And we continue to hear from the Intelligence Committee about aviation threats. These threats are becoming more and more ominous, more diversified. Why on earth would we want to cut back our screener force at this point? Now, the gentleman has talked about giving the Secretary discretion to somehow make up for this cut in the private screener force. But there's really nothing in this amendment that grants such discretion. There is not any augmenting in this amendment of the private screener account, nor is there any assurance that even if that account were to be augmented, that the people that could be hired would replace one for one the 5,000 we're talking about laying off. So just taking this amendment on the face of it, I think it is an amendment that would lessen aviation security and particularly undo a lot of the additional personnel and protections that have been put in place the last year or so. So I think it's a most unwise amendment, and I urge rejection, and I yield back my time.
Back to his time. For what purpose is the ranking member of the full committee, the gentleman from Washington, rise?
I rise in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes in opposition to the amendment.
Again, this amendment comes to us late. The gentleman from Florida happens to be the chairman of the Transportation Committee. He could write a bill in his committee to change this. All these things he's bemoaned here on the floor, he could fix in his committee and bring the bill to the floor, and we could have a debate and a discussion. But instead, he comes here with a meat-axe approach, 10% across, 10% reduction in screeners. Also, I think the gentleman's figure of 3,700 people, I think, are screeners here in the nation's capital. So, again, I just wish that the gentleman would use his jurisdiction and his committee and hold the hearings, bring TSA up here, and do the job that the chairman of the Transportation Committee should do and get this thing fixed. If it's so good, why don't you fix it? And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Alabama rise?
Rise to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I yield to the gentleman from Florida.
Well, I really thank the Chairman for yielding for me a second. Let me just try to clarify the record. The information I have on the number of screeners from our investigative staff director is 49,553 screeners. That's the figure that was given to us by TSA. The number of screeners is 49,553. Then, wait a second. I'll be glad to yield because I'm on Mr. Adholt's time. Yes, but I mean, again, if Mr. Adholt would like to do that, I'll try to leave time.
We're going down to 40.
The other point, too, when I said 3,700 administrative personnel, I'm talking about TSA bureaucrats here. I'm not talking about screening force. Not one screener am I including in that. I'm just talking about TSA headquarters or TSA administrative personnel making, on average, $105,000 a year. Now, I'm not talking about the screeners. These poor screeners, some of them are starting at the lowest wage. The money isn't going for professional screeners. Although this bill, I understand the average pay is about, if you calculate $3 billion divided by 49,000, you come, I guess, close to 60,000. And there's cost for benefits and all that, we'll grant you. But just let me try to make the record clear that, again, we have 3,700 administrative TSA people in the headquarters or associated here in the Washington area, not screeners.
Well, Gentleman Yield, I understand
I yield to the gentleman
I understand
from
that your
Washington.
amendment wouldn't do anything about those managers, because it's aimed at the screeners themselves. And also, the bill already reduces screeners to 46,000.
Reclaiming my time, I yield to the gentleman from Florida.
Well, again, the justification of most of the 3,700 who fed the administrator mushrooms and kept them in the dark was in fact, you had to have someone to supervise all these people. We have another 8,000 supervisors out in the field. When you go through the airport line sometime, I challenge you to ask some of these people what they're doing standing around, the thousands standing around. The whole point of this is there is another model, and we created that in 2001. We've had 16 airports, 5 initially. The biggest one in the minority leader's district, Mrs. Pelosi. It set the standard, the examples for the rest of us. And tomorrow we'll show a report, and we've examined position by position with San Francisco Airport against LAX, because we want to compare apples and apples, and you'll see the incredible savings. You'll see the efficiency, which is like twice as much with private screeners.
Then why don't you just
So I'm
do it?
taking the money and the positions out of the all-federal and making them available to the discretion of the administrator to use them, hopefully, for this SPP program, which is private screeners under federal supervision, which works so well. Mr. Adler.
Reclaiming my time.
The gentleman yield.
Gentleman from Washington.
Well, I mean, again, the gentleman is the chairman of the Transportation Committee. Why don't you're the one that helped create this bureaucracy. Why don't you fix it and bring a bill to the floor so we can have a chance to vote on it? If it's so good, why do you come here and at the last moment and cut
I yield to the gentleman from Florida.
10% out?
The gentleman from Alabama controls the time.
And yielding to me.
I yield to the gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Chairman, okay.
Gentleman's
well, again, I would love anything. I just love anything more than nothing more than to have the jurisdiction. I do not have the jurisdiction. I do have jurisdiction for some oversight, which we've assumed.
Oh, Homeland Security does. That's right.
Yes,
I get
they
that.
do.
Okay.
So I will be here when Homeland Security cows come marching through the pasture here and try to make the changes that are necessary. We've discussed with your staff the changes that we believe are necessary. But I don't have that jurisdiction. I wish I did. But I'm doing all I can to work with the appropriators, and you guys are, your committee, excuse me for the slang term, but your professionals are doing all they can within the limitations of your jurisdiction. I'm doing my little oversight bit, and then we have the Homeland Security Committee that will march forward with their authorization, and I will be there. I will be here for that parade. Yield back.
Thank you.
I yield back the balance of my
Gentleman
time.
yields back the balance of his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida. Those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The noes have it. The motion. For what purpose, gentleman from Florida?
I request the yeas and nays.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida will be postponed. Purpose does the gentleman from Alabama rise?
I move the committee do now rise.
Questions on the motion? Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Accordingly, the committee rises.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee of the Whole House and the State of the Union, having had under consideration H.R. 2017, directs me to report that it has come to no resolution thereon.
The Chairman of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration H.R. 2017 and has come to no resolution thereon. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the House will stand in recess subject to the call of the Chair.
The House goes into recess, not finished yet with Homeland Security spending for 2012, $42 billion for the next